From what I can tell, we'll know in March whether or not there will be a Season 3 of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Co-creator and executive producer Aline Brosh McKenna has said that 4 seasons would theoretically be required to tell this story, so cancellation would be a premature halt. It would render the series incomplete. All indications point toward cancellation, as it did last go-around, to be fair. On any other network, a show with ratings this dismal wouldn't have gone on this long, and we have gotten clues along the way. Fatal move to Friday, doubling up on the mid-season premiere, a truncated episode order from 18 to 13. In the next video, I'll try to take apart each of the variables and elements to come up with a more specific conclusion, or maybe I should say, back up my conclusion with a methodology. The conclusion is, almost definitely, will be cancelled. And if it is, what would that mean? Well, unfortunately, we don't have to speculate. The Atlantic published an article by Marianne Cooper on December 12, 2016, entitled The Infuriating Cancellation of Good Girls Revolt, which I only read on December 26th, meaning that show reached me so little, even news of its cancellation was delayed. To be honest, I did only read it as a consequence of cancellation anxiety for Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, but it was a really fascinating read. Where this titular infuriation comes from is over women-centered and women-driven shows which live or die by largely non-women executives. Maddeningly, the head of Amazon Video didn't like the show and didn't watch it, and no women were involved in the decision to cancel. So soon after the start, Good Girls Revolt is one show with girls in the title that was cancelled before its time. And this could not be more its time in another way. This is a show, allegedly, about women's empowerment, and that sounds like cultural antidote for America. The circumstances of its cancellation ring as the result of a fundamental misunderstanding of the keyholders arriving upon the material, which is just a PC way of saying sexism of the brain. The fact that it didn't perform too well indicts us also. We were not ready to receive this show, but we need it. A show I have seen, like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, for example, is among the very few and now dwindling voices for women's representations in an overtly sexist world. One of the theses of this YouTube channel is that Crazy Ex-Girlfriend isn't just a great show, it's specifically socially curative. I want to use this space in future videos to explore how and why, and I would love to be able to work with more and further seasons of the show. So what can we do? I think signal boosting is the primary thing, but that can be difficult. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is not the easiest sell in the world, but maybe parsing out why can help us in our quest to do the impossible, to recommend a television show in an era when recommending TV shows seems to be most of human communication across lines of communication, more of which are invented every day, each still holding fast to this apparent biological mandate. So, why aren't people watching Crazy Ex-Girlfriend? This was originally a Showtime show, and one of the things the co-creators say is that had it aired on that cable channel, the inherent satire probably would have shown through in the title. On a network, or whatever the CW classifies as, it is perhaps a little bit easier to take Crazy Ex-Girlfriend at face value, and you couldn't be blamed for rejecting something just because it gave you the sexist vibe, right? Unless you're still watching Game of Thrones. As we know, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is all about deconstruction, and it is also a women-driven show, both on camera and off. The off is really the big story here because it's so rare we wouldn't expect it or automatically just assume it to be the case. The ads really should say something like, Rachel Bloom and Aline Brosh McKenna present Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, because even if we don't know who these people are, we would know it's women being in on a joke, rather than a show about some dude fantasizing about a girl who likes him. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is a musical, and that's probably a tough sell on TV. It was for Bloom and McKenna, who were rejected by every network in town. Personally, I don't like musicals, but I do like music, and I like emotional storytelling, and that's what a musical is. There's nothing old-fashioned about the show. They do all kinds of genres. It's a case for you may not know until you try it, but that is, of course, the last thing anyone wants to hear. So this will also be a case of understanding your friends' tastes enough to find common ground between musicals and what they like. Why watch Crazy Ex-Girlfriend when there's Westworld and Game of Thrones and Mr. Robot and Yuri on Ice, which was probably the most passionately discussed show of 2016, as Far as my vantage goes, there's far too much TV to even watch the great shows, which is why, famously, nobody paid attention to Rectify. And even though shows exist which cover similar territory as Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, namely You're the Worst, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend offers so much uniquely, and that'll be discussed later. He can sing, he can dance, but there's something off about this guy.
Oh, Bubby would have hated you. She was really racist. It was a different time, but still wrong.
Look, I won't say he's the hardest bargain, but anything non-traditional will only pile on the non-traditional avalanche barreling down towards sensitive eyes. Seeing an Asian guy alongside a non-Asian woman is practically a unicorn, so maybe people just aren't interested in seeing interracial romance if they're not certainly used to it. But putting aside the race issue, however, Josh is not meant to be a viable romantic lead. And this goes back to the genre unpopularity problem. In tandem with being a musical, which of course is like the original film western, it's also an anti-romantic comedy. There are moments, which we'll discuss in future videos, where the show is outright indicting you for enjoying it. That's really artistically bold, and also makes for some collaborative viewing. You have to be pretty mature to optimize your experience with this show, which asks you to look inward and do more soul-searching than most, like, TV shows. If you have people in your life who think TV isn't a challenging medium, who might prefer literature or Oscar-worthy movies, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is actually closer to that than strictly rom-coms. It's complex, dark material, although it is bubbly and light in tone. When the movie Catwoman came out, 2004 I think, I was in middle school, maybe 10 or 12, and I said, who would see that movie? Girls don't like action movies, and guys don't like women. Granted, that movie is based on a pre-existing comic book which has attracted male fans, I didn't know that at the time, and central to the character is sex appeal for straight men. And double granted, people didn't see Catwoman for other reasons, but I think I was more astute than I realized. Not with the girls in action movies part, but men and works of media which headline women. Do heterosexual men glimpse a show, like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and assume it's something not made with them in mind? Let's remember that they cannot imagine a greater insult. But it's not an active thought. It's just like, oh, that's not something that I'll pay attention to. In a world of ultra-masculine shows where anti-heroes rape their girlfriends out of sheer ennui, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend might come off as by women for women. Shows for men are so stratified, so narrowly defined, so anything steering away from that event horizon is automatically careening away. And it's not entirely incorrect. I can attest heterosexual men have a much different reaction to the sexy Getting Ready song than women probably do. I've never seen this before, and it honestly blew my mind. This is like educational. It is ambassadorship from one gender to all. And I want that to be the thing. I want this to be a woman's show, an individual story that speaks to issues only 51% among us have, which can then be entered into the greater cultural conversation for the first time because men hold the megaphones usually. The fact that it's a woman's story is a huge part of what makes it so valuable. And so, if that puts people off, then that's really sad, and I don't have a suggestion for that. I remember telling my family I was watching / obsessed with this show, and the way my sister said, "You watch that?" I knew immediately she wasn't talking about this show. Probably thought it was like a Lifetime series about a crazy ex-girlfriend, and I can totally understand why that conclusion would be reached, and that's because that show actually exists. This is not a Kazam Shazam phenomenon. There's a show on Lifetime Movie Network called My Crazy Ex, and by the way, it's got 3 seasons. It also sounds terrible. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, by title alone, doesn't sound too different until you learn something about it, and despite all the media appearances Rachel Bloom makes, people just aren't up on things. Oh yeah, this show is super progressive and heartfelt and devastating, but there's only one way to prove that, and that's watch it. Yeah, again, that's a big sell for TV shows, just watch it. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is the perfect title for this show, but it does cause problems, entirely external to it. So I guess a recommendation has to come with an extensive elevator pitch. One of the reasons I think Breaking Bad was so successful was word of mouth, because the premise is so electric. In recommending it to your friends, you feel like a great storyteller. With Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, you have to interject and be like, yeah, that sounds sexist, but it's taking that idea apart, and plus there's this really great gay man, bisexual man couple, and it's so sweet, and then it's just, it's a mess. I guess the best way to recommend the show is with video, like examples of the show itself, and luckily all the music videos are online and ready to be shared. This show is pretty different. and with purpose. It's a trailblazer, carving inroads out of our televisual palettes toward a more egalitarian future in which women-driven content is a norm. But doing so as part of an opening salvo, they run into those obstacles they seek to take down. I mean, if somebody doesn't want to watch because there's man-on-man kisses, they probably wouldn't have enjoyed the rest of it either. But at the same time, that's the ultimate person a show like this needs to reach. Studies have shown that education is powered by emotional attachment, and this is perfectly facilitated by narratives. We don't just see White Josh and Daryl saying they love each other, spoilers, we come to care about them before they do. That's the process of normalization, molding brains we believe are no longer plastic. And even if such an image didn't freak me out or whatever, any lingering homophobia inside me from the 2000s is irreversibly gone, or so I hope. That's the theory anyway, and we'll talk more about the importance of narratives in the future sometime. All of these reasons, even peak television, are symptomatic of the awesome truth. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend doesn't belong on television. It's programming for the holodeck, or the iBrain. It is out of time and place, and TV isn't good enough to contain it. We should feel #humble and blessed that a robot from the future time traveled to 2015 to deliver a message of harmony and greatness. Wouldn't have gone on this long, and we have gotten clues along the way. Fatal move to Friday, doubling up on the mid-season premiere, a truncated episode order from 18 to 13. In the next video, I'll try to take apart each of the variables and elements to come up with a more specific conclusion, or maybe I should say, back up my conclusion with a methodology. The conclusion is, almost definitely, will be cancelled. And if it is, what would that mean? Well, unfortunately, we don't have to speculate. The Atlantic published an article by Marianne Cooper on December 12, 2016, entitled The Infuriating Cancellation of Good Girls Revolt, which I only read on December 26th, meaning that show reached me so little, even news of its cancellation was delayed. To be honest, I did only read it as a consequence of cancellation. From what I can tell, we'll know in March whether or not there will be a Season 3 of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Co-creator and executive producer Aline Brosh McKenna has said that 4 seasons would theoretically be required to tell this story, so cancellation would be a premature halt. It would render the series incomplete. All indications point toward cancellation, as it did last go-around, to be fair, on any other network, a show with ratings this desolation anxiety for Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, but it was a really fascinating read. Where this titular infuriation comes from is over women-centered and women-driven shows which live or die by largely non-women executives. Maddeningly, the head of Amazon Video didn't like the show and didn't watch it, and no women were involved in the decision to cancel. So soon after the start, Good Girls Revolt is one show with girls in the title that was cancelled before its time. And this could not be more its time in another way. This is a show, allegedly, about women's empowerment, and that sounds like cultural antidote for America. The circumstances of its cancellation ring as the result of a fundamental misunderstanding of the keyholders arriving upon the material, which is just a PC way of saying sexism of the brain.